Thank you for that question. I enjoy talking about my book, even though it's been quite a while since I wrote it. It came out in 2018. It was written over the course of many, many years post my doctoral work here at UT Austin. And I get asked a lot of questions about my methods, since part of it involved my own work as a voice and accent trainer in a prominent call center organization. Now, the reason that happened was also quite interesting. I attempted in many ways to go through the official routes to get a job in a call center. And it turned out that I was overqualified because I did not lie on my resume. I had 2 master's degrees by that point of time and old. I was in my late 20s by that point of time. And call center workers tend to be between the ages of 18 and 25. So at that point of time, I really wanted to work in a call center because, well, I'm an anthropologist and I imagine participant observation would have given me a better understanding of what was going on. And I saw this on field. By the time I'd conducted about 30 or 40 odd interviews, I was hitting a wall. Workers would speak to me, but they would always reproduce a sense of what they thought I wanted to hear. And I couldn't get a handle on what I needed to ask. So when I started interviewing and I revealed to various organizations that I was conducting research, I was happy to work for free, there were a lot of security concerns. Organizations really did not want to admit a researcher into this space, especially in an atmosphere of increased surveillance and worries about data leakage and things like that. And so what I did was perhaps think about not myself as a researcher, but think about myself as anybody in a city looking for a job. And I suspended fieldwork. I got a job in a call center, and because I was too old and too qualified, somebody off the cuff said, well, you've lived in the US for a couple of years. Do you want to be a voice and accent trainer? And as you can probably tell from what I'm telling you right now, I don't know what that means. I don't have an American accent. I could not reproduce it. I could try now, but at the risk of profound embarrassment, I will not. So I said yes. Of course I said yes. And I attempted to, in a ham-fisted fashion, to produce what I thought was an accent, and I got access. So for the months that I was working as a trainer, I worked. I wrote field notes about what it felt like to go to work at night, come back in the morning, what my own experience was. I produced, for whatever it means, a memoir, a sense of self in the world, and I used that to access a deeper understanding of body and work in relation to the call center. So this is how I think of my stint as a trainer as one of the most profound experiences of my fieldwork in every way possible. I think it also shifted for me my very naive assumptions about call center work, because I began, in good graduate student fashion, thinking about this work as primarily exploitative, as saying this is very bad money for very hard work and it stymies the possibility of growth in workers. And I realized during the course of my own stint as to how fun it was, how fulfilling, how fun, how exciting. And you have to remember that I had a very different context than any of the workers that entered the call center. And yet we were sort of together in this feeling of exhilaration. And that allowed me a form of analysis of the work that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So yes, hands down, my favorite thing to speak about. Thank you for that question. While I enjoy speaking about sports studies and I have done some work on it, I must give credit to my former doctoral student, Dr. Veena Mani, now out and about in the world, who also was here at UT Austin on a Fulbright a couple of years ago. And Veena's work is fantastic. She's been doing work on a form of football called Sevens in the state of Kerala in the Malabar for a while now. And she continues to work in the area of sports studies. So in the process of collaborating with her and learning from her, What I might be able to say with some level of certainty is that the relationship between sport and politics in India is, of course, obvious. This has always been the case from the work of renowned sociologists like Joe Alter, who looked at wrestling bodies, etc., etc. We know this to be the case, that sport is part of the nation state's sense of self. What has become interesting to me to observe in conducting ethnographic research on sport is what people make of it. And in the making of it, we see various configurations and reconfigurations of political subjectivity. So, in some cases, while it might be able to rise above political pressures and constraints, in others, the very field is formed through political difference. And every side differs in that. And in a recent sort of edited volume called the Postcolonial Sporting Body that Veena and I have co-edited, we gathered various up-and-coming scholars of sports studies to look at how this terrain is laid out. And some of the findings were so interesting, and I encourage people to read it, but it also allowed for us to see why it's important to look at sports in India. In relation to your question, I think I should clarify that the context of the article was very much the pandemic. And I wrote this article with Karen Kolu, who is a very well-known urbanist working in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, and has been writing about public space, public housing, migrants for a very long time now. So when Karen and I thought about what is going on vis-a-vis visibility of migrants, we were concerned with the kind of deployment of lockdown politics, lockdown philosophies in this fashion that didn't discriminate between various occupants of the city. If you ask me what has happened from then to now, perhaps it's important to index that we all seem to be afflicted with a kind of public amnesia. We all seem to have forgotten there was a pandemic in the first place. And as a result, what still is prominent is the visibility of migrants. We know this is true of a number of cities in India, driven by migrant labor, as are many, many cities in the world. Has anything shifted in terms of state politics? There, in some ways, no. The amnesia also afflicts the treatment of migrants. But in some ways, I think what may have changed is the recognition that there needs to be public housing, there needs to be accommodation of people that may not have roots in the city. Has that happened? Not necessarily. In strangely perverse fashion, we also see an increased drive towards displacement, cleaning up, ordering, more high-value urban housing, and the driving out of both migrant as well as indigenous impoverished populations. So not necessarily a hopeful answer, but in terms of visibility, we see how is it that politics is trying to not make sense of them, but handle them in some ways. Thank you for that question. It's something that I conducted research on for a very long time before being interrupted by the pandemic and haven't picked up since. But the impetus for that research was very much to try and understand the separation between medical knowledge and between identity politics of a certain kind. So if I were to think about it, how has this impacted populations that speak of their own identities in voluble fashion? I'm not sure, because I haven't kept up in terms of ethnographic research amongst people thinking about identity. However, I can say that in terms of patients with CAH, it's a fairly straightforward one to answer. The separation continues to be absolute for two reasons. One, most patients are infants or children under the care of a heteronormative heterosexual family, and therefore they are led by considerations of acceptance, of non-visibility, of normality, and things like that that are off. And I use normality in quotes, of course, to think about why is it that parents and medical professionals provide care in a fashion that is not about naming, but about caring, or about bringing the idea of disease, malaise, stuff like that out of the picture, and instead thinking about the body as one capable of functioning socially as well as bodily. So the separation is absolute in terms of those discourses. In terms of CAH itself, I suspect, and I cannot speak to it with any expertise, that social media or community mobilizations have been of tremendous help in bringing visibility to the condition itself. Influencer economies. Really interesting, and I only have a few preliminary thoughts. But I will locate it in the sense of drawing a longer arc between my work on call centers and what I'm doing vis-a-vis the influencer economy. This is a very, very new project. And the reason I got interested in this was in thinking about technology for a very long time, of course, writ large, but also in thinking about my own consumption habits. And let me confess right off the bat, I tend to be a social media addict. I tend to get hooked onto it for long periods of time, disappears into the abyss, and I tell myself, oh, I could have been writing a book. But of course, that doesn't happen. And I was interested in asking, is there a relationship between the phenomena I observed vis-a-vis call center workers and how I see young influencers who command incredible reach and make money to support themselves, their families, produce wealth for people around them, all sorts of things, while also earning the reputation of being superficial. And I was wondering, who are those people that I spoke with 15 years ago, and who are these people? I started with that. And what I found became part of a much larger set of questions. So I'm also going to speak about it in the lecture that I deliver at the South Asia Institute for the talk itself. But I've also, for the last year, been conducting a very large-scale ethnographic research project in India across 12 cities, asking very basic questions. Who are young people? What do they care about? What do they desire? What does life look like? What do their futures look like? And how do I locate the influencer economy or the popular economy within the understanding that emerges from the study? And what has come out is that the influencer economy, in my understanding, I would read as a set of symptoms. Symptoms to understand where neoliberalism has brought the Indian economy to at the current point, what the atmosphere vis-a-vis a lack of jobs produces for young people in terms of hope or hopelessness, and why is it that ideas of the hustle permeate all aspects of the economy in India, and of course find commonality with these ideas across the world. So AI or their relationship to technology is very much part of this arc. They keep up, they think about technology as allies in this search for the next big thing. So to that extent, it's very much on the same trajectory that I charted call center workers on, albeit with a whole different set of specificities. Let me answer the question by sort of thinking about where I was coming from. And where I was coming from was in continuation with the way in which I'm speaking about youth culture. Where do young people go for advice? Who are they looking to? Where are they seeking support from? Who answers their questions? And increasingly, what I found was that they were turning, of course, to the internet, social media. We know this. This is commonsensical, not something that I came up with. But in the process, certain figures kept coming up as the new experts of this economy. People who could ostensibly guide anybody that was viewing their content in how to live the good life. And that's where I started thinking about experts and expertise. Now, there's a longer set of literatures in science and technology studies on the configuration of expertise. What makes an expert? What are the rational, technical knowledge buckets from which expertise emerges? And I found it interesting to think about influencers as experts to say, have those entry barriers reduced? What now counts as valid in terms of expertise? Does expertise remain the same while figures that offer expertise keep changing? And those that we considered legitimate experts, do they have to become influencers now to be visible? The one project that occupies a lot of my mind space right now is something that I've been thinking about for a few years now, and it will likely stretch a couple more into the future. I've been looking at a form of work that is quite unrelated to the influencer economy or to technology. Technology, yes, but not quite in the same fashion as I've been working on in the last few years, which is to look at memory, identity, and masculinity in relation to industrial work and in relation to a form of work performed by managers in a factory in the 80s and 90s in Western India. It's also a township, an industrial township that I grew up in. So I'm calling upon my own memories, my own visual archive, photographs, journals, things like that, to sort of craft for myself as much as for others an understanding of a country that was making the transition from socialism to neoliberalism.